Join us for King Solomon's timeless wisdom as we explored how do I define myself? Who am I? What am I? What is my point of passion? And what does it mean? The more wisdom, the more pain? Why? We have spent the last two classes overviewing the themes of Koheles, a futility of worldly pursuits, the eternal value of serving God, exploring that age-old question of the wicked prospering, the righteous suffering, all of those themes, which are really entrenched in almost every verse. So we are not going to do all the verses. It's 12 chapters. We're just going to select a few to give a taste. So we should have some sense of having learned some of these verses inside and have more of an exposure to this work than most people out there have. Now, again, as we said in the beginning, Koheles is one of the works that we call ksuvim, the writing. Oral Torah is everything but the 24 books of what's called in English the scripture, of which we have the 5 books of Torah, and then the books of prophets, and then the books of writings. And within the writings, there are 3 of the writings that are from King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, Mishlei, Shir HaShirim, and Koheles. Mishlei and Shir HaShirim, it's not clear. There's a debate among the sages which was written first. But all agree that Koheles was the final, ultimate work of King Solomon, of the wisest man, exclusive of Mashiach himself. So there's enormous wisdom that's embedded in this work, and we're going to ponder, explore, think about some of it. Now, obviously, like any work of scriptures of the written Torah, there's numerous levels of commentary. There's the literal meaning commentary, the allegorical commentary, the midrashic commentary, the Kabbalistic, esoteric commentary, the Hasidic commentary. There's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of commentary. We're not going to do too much of that because that's not really the format of this type of class. We're just going to look at overarching what these verses are saying and what we can take from them and understand from them in our own lives. So we're looking at the beginning. We're going to start with chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to do a few verses from chapter 1. We will entirely skip chapter 2. We will then go to the beginning verses of chapter 3. Now, all these verses are very famous. Koheles is like one of these very oft quoted works. So many of these verses maybe ring a bell. If not, after you study them, you might find them in other places and say, oh, wow, yeah, I remember that. I remember studying that. Because there's much here that is just often quoted because it has such wisdom that could be decontextualized and applied in many situations. So looking at chapter 1, verse 1, the words of Koheles, son of David, king in Jerusalem. We're saying here the words of Koheles, and the Hebrew term here for word actually always implies or generally implies words of rebuke. Divrei Koheles. That Hebrew term divrei implies words of rebuke because in a sense that's what Koheles is, meaning this is the final legacy, the ethical will, the living will of King Solomon, in which he is not rebuking us per se for a sin, but rather chastising us to have a moral life, to have a godly life, to have a meaningful. Now, of course, we know who wrote this, King Solomon. But here he does not call himself Solomon or avoid his name completely. He gives himself a name, Koheles. Koheles, the name of the work, is actually the name Solomon is saying about himself. These are the words of Koheles, son of David. Well, obviously, Solomon was son of David. So Koheles is aka Solomon. Why does he call himself Koheles? So obviously, there's myriads of commentators on why, and I'm just going to give you one or two, many ideas. But Koheles, in essence, means the idea of gathering, collecting. Like we right now, of course, you know this because we mentioned this several times, are in a year called Hakel, the gathering year, the year when the Jews gather together. Hakel, Koheles, that's exactly the same root word. Actually, some say he called himself Koheles from the concept of Hakel, because the king, of course, Solomon is the ultimate king here, the king would gather all the Jews on the second day of the Sukkot holiday, the first day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, to gather all the Jews once in 7 years to inspire them with the fear of God that should last them for the next 7 years. So Solomon, the king, is sort of doing the same thing, except instead of physically gathering, and instead of it being once in 7 years, he's gathering us all via this work. And he's giving us inspiration to last forever. Many other explanations. Koheles, because he gathered inside himself all wisdom. He's the repository of wisdom, and many things along those lines. So he identifies himself here. He doesn't say Solomon, but he does say his father's name, son of David. So why is Solomon, aka Koheles, why is he saying son of David? I mean, this is at the end of Solomon's life. He's not a child. He's ruled for many, many years. Why does he identify himself here by his father? Well, that's a piece of food for thought, we could say. The sages say he was a wise man and the son of a wise. He was a king and the son of a king. He was a righteous man and the son of a righteous man, meaning Solomon had all of these merits on his own. But there was even more power to his words, because he's not just coming as himself. He's coming with all the merits of his father as well. It's not just my wisdom. I'm piggybacking on my father's wisdom. It's not just my rights as king. I'm piggybacking on my father's rights as king. It's not just my saintliness. I'm going on the shoulders of my father's saintliness. And that's a very big lesson to us, because it's really saying, of course, for many of you, you're the beginning of the line, but it's really saying that there's a certain power when we turn to God, not just with our own merits, but the merits of our forefathers, our parents, or maybe skip a generation, grandparents. When we turn to God with those merits, we have even more power. Some people, it's not their parents, but their in-laws or their grandparents' in-laws. Somewhere in the family tree, there's a merit, you pull on it. Now, of course, and the sages say here on this verse as well, how happy is the person that could depend on the merit of his father, but even better is your own personal merit. So obviously, however much righteousness you can claim from ancestors, what's most important is your own efforts. But there is an advantage to also additionally having this extra righteousness from parents or grandparents or parents-in-laws or grandparents-in-laws. It's interesting. It says that when Rivka and Yitzchak, when Isaac and Rebekah were praying for children, they were childless for 20 years. And they were both, of course, completely saintly, completely righteous, completely perfect. But it says that God listened to Isaac's prayers before Rivka's, before Rebekah's. Why? They were both so perfect, so pure, so holy. But Isaac was coming not just with his own merit, but with the merit of his parent, of Avram and Sarah, of Abraham and Sarah. So when you come to God, not only with your own merits, but with the merits of the previous generations, it really adds power to your prayer, adds power to how you're trying to draw down something from God right now with whatever you're beseeching him. So it's a powerful thing to think about. Of course, for many of you, you're going to say, I don't know anybody, my parents, my grandparents. But we all come from a long line of martyrs and miracles. Because if our ancestors weren't martyrs and didn't receive miracles, we wouldn't be here today. Or we definitely wouldn't know we were Jewish today. So the fact that we know we're Jewish means we come from good stock. We come from stock that sacrificed for being Jewish. We come from stock that upheld being Jewish. We came from stock that surely were martyred for being Jewish. And we're here today to talk about it. That's the idea of him saying he's Koheles, but not just his own merit, but Koheles, the son of David. And then the next verse, futility of futilities, said Koheles. Futility of futilities. All is futile. Now, what is he talking about here? Well, we know what he's talking about because we prepped this for the past 2 weeks. He's looking at the physical world. He's looking at the world that traps us, that snares us, that seduces us, that we get so involved in, stressed by, overwhelmed by, intimidated by. And he's saying it's all futile. It's all futile. Because unless it's permeated with the service of God, there's nothing. None of it's lasting. None of it are you taking with you. none of it remains, right? If a person's blessed, for example, with a lot of wealth, that's a beautiful blessing of God. They're supposed to view it like, okay, God made me a custodian here. God gave me the ability to help others. Otherwise, what did he give it to me for? Do I think I'm amassing this for the next generation? Who knows what's going to be with the next generation? Who knows if it will last for the next generation? So many stories. Who knows if it will last in my lifetime? People have and people lose, and people spend their life accruing, and then it all goes down the drain. I'm sure you might know people that stock market crashes or Bitcoin crashes or whatever. Money in, money out, money worshipped, money gone. So Solomon is saying, if it's not because of a service of God, you're wasting your energy on nothingness. And he's emphasizing this very, very strongly because it's all futile. Because a person could say, all right, listen, I see it doesn't help me that much. It doesn't bring me that much joy, but I know it helps everyone else, just for some reason, not me. That's what people think. He's saying, no, it doesn't help anyone. Very interesting. I was once taking my students on a tour of the Museum of Science and Industry, to bring a secular reference to this. And they had a traveling exhibit on happiness. So that's a nice exhibit. You want to explore. What does science say about happiness? And they were discussing there, like, what causes happiness? So, of course, one of the things they explored was money. I mean, obviously, as the human mind thinks, does money create happiness? And they said, from their, like, so to speak, scientific perspective, no. The caveat was, once your basic needs are met. If a person doesn't have their basic needs, they don't have shelter, they're freezing cold, they don't have anything to eat, they don't have anything to drink, then acquiring those physical things will produce happiness because you need your basic sustenance met. But once we have our baseline of survival, they said money does not enhance the quality of a person's life. Now, we know this too. But here they're saying, so to speak, from a scientific perspective, having done all their studies and surveys and exploring things and gathering a lot of data, they're saying, we all sort of think it does. We all know it doesn't, but then we fantasize it does. We hope it does. We wish it does. We want it. King Solomon said this a long time ago. You know, it's interesting because, like, now what's trending in America is animated sci-fi show, Futurama, where, like, it's like people are trying to escape this life and, like, looking to the future and whatever that's gonna give clarity to this world. And we say what's giving clarity is Torah. This was written thousands of years ago, literally. And what was written thousands of years ago was applicable then, is applicable now, and is going to shed light on the future as well. So we don't need the Museum of Science and Industries data to bring out this point. King Solomon said it a long time ago. But it's nice for us to always see affirmation in our world. It's very strongly connected, I think, how people define themselves. And very often today, still, people will say, what do you do? As like, oh, I'm a this, I'm a this, I'm a this. And that sort of defines me. And if I have a job that sounds good, I feel better about myself. And if I have a job that doesn't, I feel worse about myself. Because that's like my definition of self. That's how how I'm packaged in this world. And King Solomon is saying all of that is futile. It's empty. It's not defining you. So what would be a good way to define ourselves? Who are you? How would you answer that question? It's not by your job. We can accept that, hopefully. But then how do you define yourself? What will be your definition of self? Any thoughts on that?
I'm a Jew on my own path and craving the God's presence, attention, learning about God.
Beautiful. Any other ways people think they could define? I mean, you can say, well, that's sort of weird, but it's really not, because people do this to us all the time. They just usually couch it as, what do you do? Because that's sort of the label that you're defining yourself by. Rachel, what were you going to say?
First that comes to mind is I'm a Jew. It was like that.
Always?
I think from my childhood, I always had this I'm a Jew.
Wow.
I was
Even
not,
before
of
you
course.
learned, even before you practiced, you knew that answer was I'm a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. It's a great testimony to the Jewish soul. That's a big testimony to the Jewish soul. It really, really, really is. Because as Rachel's saying and as Menucha's saying, that of course is the answer of who are you? Who am I? I'm a computer programmer. Who am I? I'm a banker. I'm a housewife. I'm a housewife is no more defining me than I'm a banker, or I'm a teller, or I'm a computer programmer, or I'm a dishwasher, or I'm a sales clerk. That's not who I am. Those are things I do. Who am I? Who I am is a Jew. What does that mean, who I am is a Jew? What is a Jew? What's the definition of a Jew? The definition of a Jew is a godly soul. That's what makes someone a Jew. You have a Jewish mother, you're born with that godly soul. If you convert, you receive it through the conversion process. That godly soul means you're a Jew. So who are you? What are you? What are you all about? How do you define yourself? I'm a Jew. I'm a piece of God. That's what's not futile. So when King Solomon is saying it's futile, it's emptiness, it's nothingness, it's futility, that's all the stuff of our world. What's not futile is we're a piece of God. The core of the soul of a Jew comes from the core of God's essence. That's who we are. And it's super strong to look at ourselves that way and to look at everyone else that's Jewish that way. Sometimes it's hard for ourselves to look at ourselves, and sometimes it's hard for us to look at people that way. And sometimes it's hard both. But it's true to look at ourselves and it's true to look at others. Who is this person? A Jew, a godly soul, a piece of God. Who am I? A Jew, a godly soul, a piece of God. Now you could get more specific than that. In the Talmud, there's a discussion of several sages that are speaking to sages who are all the children of very great sages. As we were saying before about Solomon, it's not just Solomon, it's Solomon, the son of David, a great, godly, one of the greatest and most godly people of ever, the son of one of the most greatest and godly people ever. So these great sages of the Talmud, all of their fathers were very, very, very great sages. And the question they were asked was, what was your father's point of passion? In Aramaic, it's zihir tzei, which in the English, in case our Aramaic is a little rusty, what was his point of passion? What does that mean, what was his point of passion? All of these people are perfect and great and holy and saintly and godly and learned. What does that mean? What it means is every soul has something that it has a special affinity to, a special piece of serving God that it's going to illuminate the world with its shine. So of course, all these people served God perfectly. And of course, the sages knew that all these great sages served God perfectly. But what was their point of passion? If we want to understand them, if we want to know who they were, we're not saying did they work out or not, what was their height, their dimensions. We're saying what inspired and ignited their soul. That's who they were. So it's an interesting thing if you're thinking about it for yourself, and it's a worthwhile thought when we're talking here about Solomon's words to us, not to get trapped in the nothingness of life, but to really define ourselves like Rachel said she always did, which is amazing, like Menucha's saying, as a Jew, as one who's serving God, as one who's here to bring God into this world, as one who's here to illuminate the world with God, and say, I'm a Jew. I'm a godly soul. I'm a piece of God. And what is my point of passion? What specifically can I do? Why was I sent to this world? All of us are here to bring redemption because Mashiach is coming now and we're the people doing it. We know we were all here previously by the Exodus from Egypt, and we all brought redemption then. And that's why God brought us all back to bring it again. So we all collectively have that point of passion. We know how to bring redemption. We know how to create Mashiach. But also we have very individual ways our soul gets ignited, gets excited, shines. You could stop and think for a minute in all the different ways you've learned how to serve God. If you can think of something that, yeah, I relate to that one. That one calls my name. And again, it could be that there's more than one, and it could be you haven't encountered it yet because you're still beginning your journey or in the middle of your journey towards finding out all the ways you're supposed to be serving God. But maybe you've merited to already know or to already have some sense of something in serving God that really talks to your soul really strongly, that your soul's energy is pulled out. Anyone have anything like that they can think of in their own service of God? Something that really they feel they're shining in, they love, that excites them? Because we all have it. You don't know? Maybe you're not thinking of it right now. I'm putting you on the spot. Maybe you haven't encountered it yet. But we all have something that is our soul's forte, our soul's shining dimension in this world. Anyone have something that comes to mind?
I can share, and I don't know, shining would be probably too much to say, but maybe I feel like my purpose is to be like a good mother and grandmother, and give what we're supposed to give from generation to generation, the Torah knowledge, the love of God, and the joy of serving Hashem, teaching. That's how I see it.
I think that's really beautiful. And I understand how Chava's taking what I said and framing it in a different way. And I think what she's saying is very valid. Another way of looking at it is, why am I here? And again, well, I'm a Jew. I'm here to serve God. I'm here to illuminate this world. I'm here to bring redemption. True. All of that's true. But there might be specific individual things you find, like Chava's saying, which is very beautiful as she's seeing her role. Why is she here? She's here to nurture the next generation, to make sure this carries on, to make sure this continues. I think that's very beautiful to have that perspective on why am I here. Someone else can speak about either how I phrased it, what you see as your soul's point of passion, your soul's beauty. I look at it that we all have tremendous strengths and tremendous weaknesses, and we're here for both. We're here to gift the world with our strengths, with our beauty, and we're here to gift ourselves by transforming our weaknesses. What's hard for us, what's incredibly hard for us, is why I'm here. Now, the world is not going to get beautified by my struggles. That's a reason why my soul is in this world. At the same time, I do have gifts that are beautifying the world. And that's also why I'm here. Anyone else? Anyone else can think or sees in themselves some thoughts on this? Be open to finding what brings you tremendous joy, what brings you deep pleasure. Which of the commandments make you feel like, I'm really connecting. This is really mine. Or as Chava's saying, when you feel I have a purpose, this is my purpose. Of course, we all have many purposes, but this feels like a purpose. Who else was going to add something?
For me, probably it would be learning. Since I started late the past 10 years ago, right? So to catch up on all the learning, and I would say learning, and same as Chava said, but not only in the family, but bring God in all the spheres, like my friends' lives, my work, everywhere where I can to bring God, I do.
Remember, many years ago, Manucha wrote into the Rebbe, and she got that very strongly as permission. Remember that very strongly. I remember it was very clear. You are here to bring to as many people as you can an awareness of God. But I really respect what Chava's saying, and I can see that for many people as like, especially people where it's difficult, where the children weren't raised this way, where there's resistance, where if not the children, you try for the grandchildren. I respect that, and it resonates very deeply what Chava said. But obviously what Manucha is saying is very powerful. When you look at the world and you say, I'm here to bring the world to God. That was the first Jew. Abraham. What made Abraham so special? Was he the first holy person in this world? No, he wasn't. There always was an absolute tzaddik. There always was someone who was so close to God and was living a godly life from the beginning of time until Abraham. Always. There had to be. The world cannot exist if there's not a perfect tzaddik in whose merit the world exists. And we know their names, and they're written in the Chumash. They're written in scriptures, and Mesushelach, and Lemach, and Chanoch. From the beginning of time until Abraham, there always was. So why is Abraham the first Jew? What was different about Abraham than all that came before him, including Noah? Because Abraham was the first one who felt like menucha. Abraham was the first one who said, it's not enough that I have a relationship with God. Abraham came from a long line of holy people, but they weren't Jews. They were holy, they were godly, they were close to God, they were serving God. But we view Abraham as the first Jew because Abraham was the first one who said, I have a responsibility to bring an awareness of God to the world. And that's what he dedicated his life to. And that's what God said, wow, I so appreciate that. God said, Abraham, you and me are partners in creation. I created these creatures, but you're making them aware of me. So we're partners. Thank you. Because of you, my creatures know about me. So that's a very Jewish ideal. From the beginning of being Jewish is a sense of, it's not enough for me to feel close to God. It's not enough for me to have this. And for many of you, you might be the only one in your environment or family or circle of friends that knows it's not enough. I got to share the wealth. This is wealth that's real. This is wealth you take with you. This is wealth that's meaningful, not the stuff King Solomon's talking about. And I've got to share it with others. But it's beautiful when you have this sense of why. What is my soul excited by? Anyone else?
I never find what my passion is. It's just like so frustrating for me. I always somehow I concentrate on not transgressing. I always not transgressing is kind of like I understand that doing positive commitments brings a lot of light into the world, and I am trying to do positive commitments, but I am more into not transgressing somehow. I always concentrate on that. And as far as passion, the only thing I could say is when I study Torah, I do feel very nurtured. I mean, I do understand that I really do feel that I'm being enveloped connected to something powerful. Even my husband, who doesn't notice things that easily, a few years ago, he said to me, why don't you sit down and I'll read you a portion of Torah? And I was a little surprised. And I said, why do you want to do that? He said, you were a little upset now. And I know when I read your Torah, it really calms you down. And he opened my eyes.
Beautiful. Wow, that's amazing. I think what you're saying about keeping away from the prohibitions does relate to a soul's energy. When we serve God, we have the positive, doing what God asks, like charity and Torah study, and saying blessings and eating kosher and all the doings, dressing modest. And we have all the prohibitions. In the Hebrew, we say, aseh tov, do the good, sor meirah, keep from evil. And if this is what you're seeing your soul naturally goes to, that means this is your soul's point of passion. Keeping from the wrong. That's what relates to your soul. Again, it doesn't mean you're off the hook for the other half, but it does mean that you're saying this is what your soul really resonates with, is turning from evil, turning from evil, turning from evil. That's as much a point of passion as saying studying Torah or sharing with the world or educating the next generation. Absolutely. It absolutely is. So it's something we could think about. What's the point in thinking about it? Because when you see your strengths, your beauties, what ignites you, what inspires you, then you're more focused on going in that direction. Just like Rivka's saying when her husband said, oh, you're in a much better mood when you learn. I want you to be in a good mood. So it's like, oh, I didn't realize that about myself. Hey, let me use this. Oh, I'm here to nurture my family. I'm here to make sure my friends and the people I meet in any capacity have a relationship with God. Oh, I'm here to keep from evil. I want to minimize and lessen the evil in this world. Well, as you become aware, this is your soul's strengths, you focus on it more. So that was the second verse of this chapter 1. The third verse, what profit does man have for all his labors, which he toils beneath the sun? So again, King Solomon is continuing this theme. If it's all futile, what are you working so hard? Again, you're not taking it with you. You're stressing, you're struggling. And what are you getting from it? What's the point? It's like, open your eyes. What are you wasting your time on? Well, again, for a lot of us, it has to do with money and earning money. Of course, it could also be in beautifying our homes or making sure our figures, I mean, there's many different ways our futility can go, but usually money is like the most common theme of all of these. But again, it's like, what are you wasting your time for? If we already established it's futile, if we already established this is not going to bring you happiness, this is not going to enhance the quality of your life, this is not going to be something that has any eternal worth, this isn't even something you'll be able to pass to your children. You have it today, you might not have it tomorrow, let alone for them. So what are you wasting your time on? What your time should go to is God. That's purposeful. That's meaningful. That's your definition of self. That's why you're in this world. Now, again, all these verses have many deeper levels that I'm not touching on, so I'll just give you one to give an example of it. With this here, when Solomon is saying, what's the purpose of man with all of his work that's under the sun? So the real work of a Jew, of course, isn't manual labor or computer work. The real work of a Jew is serving God, studying the Torah, doing the commandments, the mitzvahs. Even here, Solomon is saying, what's the point in all your work, your real work, Torah mitzvahs, if it stays under the sun? What does he mean by that? What he means is, if your work is not flying and soaring to God with the wings of love and fear, it's under the sun. It's stuck on planet Earth. What's the point? So does he mean, what are you wasting time on doing all this physical work when the only thing real is serving God? Absolutely. And does he mean, why are you wasting your time serving God if you're not enhancing it with love and fear? Absolutely. And many, many, many other dimensions, of course, as well. Verse, a generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth endures forever. And again, this idea of the generation coming, the generation going is just continuing the same theme. What do you focus on the physical world for? We know you're not taking it with you, and we know it's not going to even last for your descendants. Whatever you accrued, somebody else is going to come and take. That's about the wicked, that they spend so much time trying to gather things that their children will never get anyway. Somehow it'll be lost from them. There's no point. And what King Solomon now is going to do is actually note, though we're not going to read these verses, but all of the four elements of creation, the physical world, and actually the spiritual world, the godly spiritual world, and the forces of evil spiritual world, are all built on four elements: fire, earth, wind, and water. And now Solomon alludes to fire, earth, wind, and water, which again is the physical composition of our world. It's the spiritual composition. It's the godly spiritual. It's the antithesis of godly spiritual. On every level, it's all in this sets of four: fire, earth, wind, and water. So Solomon is now going to reference all of them with, again, the same theme of like, what's our strivings for? Man's achievements come and go. The earth, that lasts forever. But we're human. So what are we wasting our time on? We're now going to jump. Those are the first four verses of the chapter. I now want to jump to the end of the chapter, to the last verse, because there's a concept that everything follows a conclusion. So the last verse has a special message for us. So I'm going to read you the last verse and we'll discuss it, I guess, briefly at this point. For with much wisdom comes much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases pain. There's many ways to understand this. A person, there's so many commentaries here. One is the wiser you get, the more you can actually reflect on yourself and see flaws you didn't realize before. When you were young, you weren't wise enough to see your flaws. As you get older and get wiser, now you realize things. So the more knowledge, the more grief, the more pain, the more work. I think also on a very simple level, we could look at it just as we grow in wisdom or maturation. There's intellectual wisdom and there's maturation wisdom. It's interesting. We just had in Torah recently the story of the 5 daughters of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad was a righteous Jew who, various opinions who Tzlafchad was, but for whatever reason died in the desert without any sons, and therefore had no one to carry on his name. He had 5 very wise daughters, and they came to Moses and said, Moses, we got to inherit, because if we don't inherit, our father wouldn't have a portion in Israel. That's wrong. And they were right. And God said to Moses, they're right. But anyway, in enumerating the names of the daughters of Tzlafchad are actually written 3 times in the verses, which is pretty impressive. 3 times in the verses we're enumerating the name. Why do we even enumerate it once? What do we care? These women lived over 3,000 years ago. They were righteous. They were cool. They were very, heralders of real women's rights. But so what? For whatever reason, they were very special, and their names are listed 3 times. And the first 2 times in one order, and the 3rd time in a different order. And we're told the first 2 times it was listed according to their wisdom. And the 3rd time it was listed according to their age. Because the 3rd time is when they got married, and they got married in age order. So now we have the listing according to age. And the other times when they're talking to Moses and they're giving all their arguments why they should get the land, then it's in order of their wisdom. It's an interesting point. Rashi says, wait, we're listing them like this, we're listing them like this, to tell us they're all equal. The listing according to intellect, listing according to age, it's all they were all equal. What do you mean they're all equal? They're clearly not equal. Here, this one's older than this one. Here, this one's smarter than this one. So they're not equal. This one's smarter than this one. How can we say they're equal? The Lodge explains, because there's wisdom of mind and there's wisdom of age. And it balanced out. So some were smarter and some were older. And with years, you also accrue wisdom, as hopefully we've decided. So when you put this all in the wash, it comes out even. Those that had the intellectual advantage and those that had the age advantage, in the end, they all became equal. So there's a wisdom we have from our brains, from how much our minds are developed. And there's a wisdom of years. I can say for myself, over the years, I've become more sensitized to things that maybe I didn't feel their degree of pain when I was younger. Like even in the Torah, when we hear about the binding of Isaac, or the Jew stuck in the desert for 40 years, or the stories we know from the sages of Rabbi Akiva spending 24 years away from his wife, or Esther being taken by Ahasuerus. As we mature, sometimes we feel the pain in that more because we understand it on a different level. How would you understand this concept? Because King Solomon, who was the second wisest man of all times, right? The wisest man of all times is Mashiach, and the second wisest is Solomon. Why was Solomon so wise? Because when he was a child and he became king, God said, what gift can I give you? What gift do you want? And he asked for wisdom, which was a smart thing to ask for. And therefore he was so wise. So he was ultimately wise. And obviously he appreciates wisdom. And obviously he wanted wisdom. At the same time, he's saying the more wisdom, the more pain. The more you know, the more it can hurt. How do you understand this idea of the more wisdom, the more pain? And again, there's such a range of understanding. It can be very simply like, if someone says to you, well, you want to know the truth, I'll tell you, but you might not want to hear it. More wisdom, more pain. There's many levels. Anyone, how they would understand, how they've seen in their life this, the more wisdom, the more pain?
You see things on a more deeper level, not only on the surface, but much deeper. And it can give you either more joy or more pain.
Depending on what it is.
Depending what it is.
It's interesting. It says about the son of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, of course, is one of the greatest of the greats of all times, buried in Meron. And he and his son, Reb Elazar, lived for 13 years in a cave. They were hiding from the Romans. And they survived on a miraculous buxer tree and a miraculous spring of water. And they came out so holy that after 12 years, when they came out, they literally looked and burnt up the world, went back for one more year, and were able to reacclimate to life with people as we know the world. They were very, very holy. So at one point, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai taught his son, Reb Elazar, the Kabbalistic secrets of the destruction of the temple. And Reb Elazar said, when he learned these Kabbalistic secrets of the destruction of the temple, wow, there's such joy implanted in my heart on one side, and there's such pain implanted in my heart on the other side. What did he mean? Well, he meant, on one hand, I know Kabbalistic secrets. I know the secrets, the mystery of the divine destruction of the temple, what was really going on. Wow, I'm full of joy in my knowledge of God's secrets. And wow, I have so much pain. Because now I really understand the destruction. Before I knew it was a building, I knew it was people, and that was very painful. Now I understand it on levels of God's reality, and that's even more painful. So I have so much joy from this knowledge, and I have so much pain from this knowledge. Like Rivka's saying, as you gain more depth, it goes in both directions. Anyone else? Any other ways you can process this idea? Again, we're Jews. We're all for acquiring knowledge. We're all for acquiring wisdom. We tremendously value it. So what do you think? How do you understand what warning Solomon was giving here? The more wisdom, the more
thought. When we learn about war to come and the explanation what Gehenna is, right? And I remember that it's comparison like that. We're experiencing pain from being embarrassed. So that's when we look at our life, right, and what we've done, and it's so embarrassing that it's like painful. So I think it's maybe I don't know to what extent it happens here. The more we learn, and I'm talking about myself, and look back at my life, what I did when I didn't know, whatever, I have this a little like a pain and like embarrassment for what I've done.
I think that's very true. That makes a lot of sense. And what you're saying, what Chava is saying is, if she didn't gain the wisdom, if she didn't have the new knowledge to understand what's real and what's meaningful and what's right and what's wrong, she wouldn't know how wrong she was before, and she wouldn't feel that pain and that shame and that guilt and that desire to how can she rectify what she did previously when she was ignorant. So, that ignorant is bliss situation, which of course it's not bliss at all, but it's easier. And knowledge comes with a lot of price tags. And I think what Chava is saying definitely makes sense as a point that Solomon's bringing out here. And again, I think that very much aligns with a great commentator that said that his interpretation of this was, as you grow in knowledge, you more and more recognize your own flaws, which you didn't realize before, and they didn't bother you before. And now you have the pain over your own flaws and defects. And Chava is saying there is the pain of seeing how you lived and the choices you made when you didn't know. And it's painful now, and it wouldn't be painful if you didn't have this knowledge. Of course, we're glad for the knowledge, and we want the knowledge, and we want the opportunity to rectify. But that doesn't mean you don't look back with a lot more pain than you would have had otherwise. We're actually very careful in terms of going with this point that Chava was saying about really looking back at your past and seeing what you did wrong. We're careful with knowledge, meaning if you know someone's doing something wrong, but there's no point in telling them because they're not going to change. And we're actually told maybe you're not supposed to tell them. Depends. You have to think it over. It's not a simple decision sometimes. Because if someone knows and does wrong, it's worse than if they're ignorant and do wrong. But if they don't know, how will they ever change? How will they ever grow? How will they ever improve? So this concept of, do you share the knowledge? Do you instruct? Do you show someone they're doing something wrong is not so simple. Knowledge is very powerful. Knowledge is very beneficial, and knowledge also creates accountability. And do we want this other person to be accountable? Only if we think they're going to live up to it. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that?
I'm not saying anything new. I just want to say that I agree with Chava.
I really also liked Chava's thought. It really resonated with me.
I'm sure it resonated with all of us, because she's right. And we're old enough, and we all have things in the past that we understand now differently than when we were doing them. Absolutely. And definitely makes sense that that was one of the levels that King Solomon meant. All right, so we will stop at this point. That's all we're doing of chapter 1. We did the first 4 verses. We skipped a lot of it. We went to the last verse. We're going to completely skip chapter 2. And next week, we will discuss the first verses that are very, very powerful verses of chapter 3. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining. We should have a very meaningful week. And these are the days of the 9 days that we want to transform from mourning to joy, from pain to redemption. Should happen now.